Imagine you're 35 years old, and everywhere you turn, the pressure is mounting. Your family, your friends, the world around you, everyone is asking, when are you going to settle down? It's a constant reminder that time seems to be running out, that you're supposed to have it all figured out by now. For Daniela, this feeling of urgency became more than just uncomfortable. It became suffocating. At 35, she was still single, and the weight of that reality was a burden she could no longer carry. So, what does she do? She turns to something she'd always been skeptical of: online dating. Little did she know, this decision, driven by the need to please others and find love, would lead her down a path so twisted and dangerous that her life would never be the same again. Daniela had always been independent, driven, and content with her life. But as her 30s progressed, the pressure from her family became harder to ignore. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same topic. When would she finally meet someone? The more she heard it, the more she felt like there was something wrong with her, like she was falling behind while everyone around her was getting married and starting families. It wasn't that she hadn't been open to love, it just hadn't happened yet. But the constant questions, the looks of concern, the well-meaning advice, it all became too much. So, Daniela did something she never thought she'd do. She signed up for an online dating site. For someone who had always valued authenticity and personal connection, the idea of finding love through an app felt foreign, even a little desperate. But at this point, she felt like she had no other choice. Time was ticking, and the need to meet someone, to find a partner before it was too late, was overwhelming. As she filled out her profile and clicked send, Daniela had no idea that this decision would change the course of her life forever. She wasn't just looking for a date anymore. She was looking for a lifeline, someone to fill the emptiness she felt, to take away the questions and the doubts that had taken root in her mind. The moment her profile went live, she felt an odd mix of excitement and anxiety. Would someone actually respond? Would this be the opportunity she'd been waiting for? But what Daniela didn't know was that the very first person who reached out to her would be the one who would change everything. His name was Chris, and at first, he seemed like the answer to her prayers. Charming, attentive, and most importantly, on the same page. He was looking for a wife, just like Daniela. It felt like a dream come true. It was too easy, too perfect. Daniela quickly found herself swept up in the romance of it all. But what she didn't realize was that behind his smooth words and seemingly perfect profile, there was a darkness waiting to reveal itself. Have you ever felt like time was running out, like you had to settle down because the world expected it? Daniela couldn't believe her luck. Chris, a 38-year-old man, seemed almost too perfect to be true. He was charming, confident, and had a magnetic personality that drew her in from the start. They hit it off right away, shared interests, similar values, and most importantly, the same life goals. He told Daniela everything she wanted to hear. He wanted to get married, start a family, and build a future with her. Finally, someone who was on the same page, someone who understood the urgency she felt. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniela believed that maybe, just maybe, she had found the one. Chris made her feel like she was the center of his world. His words were sweet, his gestures thoughtful. Their relationship felt like a whirlwind romance, one that Daniela thought was a dream come true. He seemed to have everything together. Successful in his career, financially stable, and always so attentive. Daniela felt like she had found someone who would bring her the happiness she'd been craving. Behind his perfect persona, Daniela couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. At first, it was subtle. Little things that Daniela tried to brush off. Chris would call her more than she expected, even at odd hours, just to check in, just to hear her voice. He needed constant validation, constantly seeking affirmation of his worth. At first, it felt like affection. After all, who didn't like being loved and needed? But soon, it became clear that Chris was more than just affectionate. He was possessive. He wanted Daniela's attention on him all the time. And the more she gave, the more he wanted. Whenever she couldn't respond quickly enough, he'd accuse her of not caring, of not putting in enough effort. It started to wear her down. But it didn't stop there. Chris also began to open up about his past. He confided in Daniela about his struggles with drug addiction. But it wasn't a story of redemption. It was a tale of blame. He constantly shifted the responsibility onto others, making Daniela feel as if she was the only one who could help him. Daniela, with her deep-rooted desire to fix things, to help those she loved, started to believe that if she stuck by him, she could make it better. But with every passing day, Daniela began to see more cracks in Chris's perfect facade. She started to notice how controlling he was, how much he needed her attention, and how easily he turned manipulative when she tried to pull away or set boundaries. He would twist her words, make her feel as though her independence was a sign of disinterest. At the same time, he seemed to be the perfect man in all other respects, charming, articulate, and always ready to promise a better future. Daniela couldn't help but feel torn. Something was off, but she couldn't figure out what. Was she just overthinking it? Or was Chris really hiding something deeper, something darker than she was ready to confront? She kept telling herself that love could fix anything, that maybe, just maybe, if she stayed by his side, things would improve. But deep down, a small voice kept growing louder, a voice that urged her to question whether this relationship was truly healthy or if she was just seeing what she wanted to see. Chris's behavior started to deteriorate rapidly. He wasn't the man she had fallen for anymore. His temper flared at the smallest things. Conversations that once felt warm and loving now turned into arguments. His outbursts were frequent, unpredictable, and often left Daniela shaken. He'd accuse her of being distant when she simply needed some space. She began to question everything. Was he truly the man he portrayed himself to be in the beginning? Or had it all been an act to lure her in? She could no longer deny the growing unease that plagued her whenever she was around him. The dream of finding love, of building a future was slipping through her fingers. But was she strong enough to walk away? Chris wasn't just becoming emotionally manipulative. He was becoming obsessive. The texts started flooding in, harassing her with messages demanding to know where she was, who she was with, and why she wasn't answering his calls. It wasn't just the phone anymore. He began showing up unannounced at her work, at her home. Anywhere she went, he was there. It felt like no matter what she did, she couldn't shake him off. Her every move was being watched. He was suffocating her. But Daniela didn't know who she could turn to. She had already invested so much time and energy into this relationship. With his behavior spiraling out of control, she was unsure of how to break free without losing everything. She didn't know how much longer she could take the emotional strain, but the thought of giving up on the dream of a happy life haunted her. Just when Daniela thought she couldn't take any more of Chris's torment, something unexpected happened. She bumped into David, an old classmate she hadn't seen in years. David was kind, warm, logically, and seemed genuinely interested in Daniela. For the first time in a long while, Daniela felt a spark, a glimmer of hope that maybe there was a chance for real happiness outside of the toxic relationship she had been trapped in. David made her feel special, valued in a way Chris never had. He didn't pressure her, didn't manipulate her. He simply showed her kindness and respect. Daniela was beginning to believe she had finally found a way out of the nightmare she'd been living. She was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, she could have a second chance at happiness with David. But little did she know, the path to freedom would come with a price. Was she unknowingly walking into a trap that could cost her everything? As Daniela began to open up to David, Chris's obsession with her only grew stronger. He watched from the shadows, unable to accept that she might be moving on. Every text message, every meeting between Daniela and David felt like a dagger to his pride. The more she pulled away, the more he spiraled, consumed by jealousy and a need to control her. Daniela had become his possession in his mind, a possession he could not bear to lose. Chris began to track Daniela's movements more obsessively. He would find ways to show up where she was, often at unexpected times, always lurking in the background like a shadow she couldn't shake. Each time she saw him, it was clear how much he despised the idea of her moving on. One night, it all reached a boiling point. Daniela was home, preparing for a quiet evening. She had been texting David earlier in the day, making plans for the weekend. As she relaxed, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, her heart must have dropped at the sight of Chris standing there, his face twisted with rage, his hands trembling. He had come to confront her, to demand answers, but this time there was no reasoning with him. Chris didn't just want answers. He pulled out a knife. Daniela's eyes widened with fear as the realization hit her too late. He lunged at her, the blade cutting through the air with terrifying precision. She didn't have time to defend herself. In the blink of an eye, Daniela's future was destroyed, shattered beyond repair. What started as a desperate search for love had ended in the most unthinkable of ways. As Chris stood over her lifeless body, the magnitude of his actions began to sink in. The rage had burned out, leaving only cold realization. In a daze, he fled the scene, leaving Daniela behind in a pool of blood. The police were relentless. A nationwide manhunt was launched, and soon the search for Chris became the focal point of every officer's attention. He had fled the country, but no one could predict where he had gone. Using fake identities, changing his appearance, and cutting off all communication with the outside world, Chris thought he could disappear for good. He made one fatal mistake. He reached out to the police. In an unexpected twist, he offered bizarre statements, almost as if he wanted them to catch him. His arrogance was palpable. It was as if he couldn't comprehend the consequences of his actions. He showed no remorse, no understanding of the pain he had caused, and the lack of fear in his voice might just have been his undoing. The authorities continued to close in on Chris. They pieced together the details of his movements, following every lead, looking at every false identity he had used. The tension mounted. Daniela's family and friends waited in agony, hoping for some semblance of justice. Chris was finally caught. His time on the run was over. The authorities arrested him and brought him back to face the charges for Daniela's murder. In court, his defense was weak, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Could things have turned out differently for Daniela? Would she have been alive today if she had waited longer, listened to the warning signs, and trusted her instincts before rushing into a relationship out of pressure and loneliness. Her story is a painful reminder of how easy it is to get caught up in the desire to find love, especially when life's pressures seem to be closing in. The desire for connection, the fear of being alone, can cloud our judgment and lead us into situations that are dangerous and ultimately life-threatening. Daniela's tragic end didn't just happen because of Chris. It was the result of her willingness to ignore the red flags and rush into something she wasn't truly ready for. This case is a stark reminder that rushing into relationships for the wrong reasons can have dire consequences. It's so easy to want to believe that love will fix everything, but it's vital to trust your instincts and not ignore the warning signs that may be staring you right in the face. We must all be cautious and take the time to really get to know someone before letting them into our lives. If this story shook you to the core, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Your safety, your mental health, and your peace of mind are worth more than any relationship. Don't let anyone or anything rush you into something you're not ready for.